Right. So we're back to the Go Show, and we're back to this is volume 2, and we've had a request to read a major writing of Nichiren Daishonen's entitled "The Letter to Shimoyama," and it's all about. It's actually a refutation. It's a story, but it's ultimately a refutation doctrinally of the Nimbutsu. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the background, and then I'm going to go into the dictionary and talk about Amida, you know, Nimbutsu, and very briefly qualify what this conflict is. Okay, all right. So background, and that would so letter from Shimoyama starts on page 684. It ends on page 712, and the background starts on 712. So I'm going to 712 to read the background. It's 26 pages long, so we're not going to get done today. Okay. Background: one of the Daishonen's 10 major writings, Letter to Shimoyama, is a petition to Shimoyama Hyogo Goro Mitsumoto, the steward of the district of Shimoyama near Mount Minobu in the province of Kai. The Daishonin wrote it on behalf of a priest named Inabo Nichii in the 6th month of 1277 while residing at Mount Minobu. Okay, so the thing about this letter is the way that it's written. It's actually written by the Daishonin for the sake of this young man named Inabo. Okay, so Inabo is trying to convince either not sure if it was his lord or his dad. Okay, and this is the story of how he met the Daishonin's teaching, and then the Daishonin has taken over and helped write this letter for him so that he can convey artfully, because he's going to a high official, his father or his lord, to try and convince him that please don't try and make me do the Nimbutsu. I don't want to do Nimbutsu anymore. It's not appropriate for the Nimbutsu. And the priest Nichiren has been teaching this, okay? So let me read the background. One of Nichiren's 10 major writings, Letter to Shimoyama, is a petition to Shimoyama Hyogo Goro Mitsumoto, the steward of the district of Shimoyama near Mount Minobu in the province of Kai. The Daishonin wrote it in behalf of a priest named Inabo Nichii, in the 6th month of 1277 while residing at Mount Minobu. Inabo Nichii had been converted by Nikko in Ikekeo to the Daishonin's teachings and tried to convert Shimoyama Mitsumoto, who was Inabo's father, or according to another account, his lord in the feudal system of the time. But Shimoyama, who was a believer in the Nimbutsu or Pure Land teachings, furiously opposed. So the father or the lord, same thing as like with so many other guys. They're already doing Nimbutsu. They're totally against Nichiren, right, trying to say, don't do Nimbutsu, chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, right? So, or Pure Land teachings, furiously opposed the priest's newfound faith. Hearing this, the Daishonin wrote a petition on behalf of Inabo to persuade Shimoyama to discard the pure faith teachings and take faith in the Lotus Sutra. Which the cool thing is that the Lord, this guy did. Oh. Okay, the young man won, right? Thanks to this petition, this letter. This letter's heavy duty. That's why it's one of the 10 major writings, and it's 26 pages long. It's going to talk about stuff that's in the opening of the eyes. It's going to do almost a recap of this entire doctrine. Okay, it's going to tell how this kid found Nichiren in the first place and hid outside his hut in order to listen to what he had to say, and it touched him so much that he began chanting immediately. Okay, so this is somebody that had a connection with it, I've shown, and to the point that one of the 10 major writings was written in association with him. The petition explains the superiority of the Lotus Sutra to the Pure Land doctrines, and states that Inabo's conversion, top up 713, and states that Inabo's conversion to the Lotus Sutra constitutes a distinguished act of loyalty to Shimoyama. Later, Shimoyama, in fact, gave up the Nimbutsu and became a follower of the Daishonin's teachings. In the beginning paragraphs, the voice, and you have to understand this as I read it. In the beginning paragraphs, the voice is that of Inabo addressing his angry father or lord, Shimoyama. Inabo explains that he has ceased reciting the Amida Sutra and instead taken up recitation of the Lotus Sutra because of an encounter with the sage Nichiren. Now, when he says he has taken up recitation of the Lotus Sutra, what do you think? If Nichiren's the one that's taught him this, what is he actually doing? He's chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. He's not reciting the Lotus Sutra. Nichiren's not teaching anybody in the latter day of the law to recite the Lotus Sutra, other than if he thinks that they can't perceive the fact that we're in the latter day of the law, and you know, they want to do some prayer for their dad or something. There are ghosts like that. But whenever you see instead taken up the recitation of Lotus Sutra, that means started chanting the Daimoku because of an encounter with the sage Nichiren. He says he went to Mount Minobu to listen to a lecture by the sage without the intention of taking faith. He writes very briefly of what he felt about the lecture. Okay, this is Inabo. The letter then outlines the Daishonin's lecture from a third-party viewpoint. The lecture first introduces the time, the people's capacity, the country, and the proper sequence of propagation. Okay, then it describes that, which is like the selection of time stuff. Then it describes the history of the spread of Buddhism in Japan. This begins with the Chinese priest Qianchen, known in Japan as Ganjin, who brought the Hinayana precepts and the Tentai teachings to Japan, but propagated only the former, which he thought were appropriate to the time. Later, Dingyo appeared and studied Tentai's teachings and investigated thoroughly the doctrines of the 6 schools of Nar, going there himself, demonstrating the superiority of the former over the latter. Dingyo also asserted that the Hinayana precepts should be abolished and replaced with the Mahayana precepts. And don't forget, the whole thing was there were Hinayana precepts platforms for the ordination of their priests, but there was no unified Mahayana ordination platform. And that's what Dingyo ultimately created in Rakuji. Okay, so next, it's in Rakuji, Mount Hei. All right. Next, the Daishonin describes the spread of Buddhism during the former, middle, and the latter days of the law. So you can see this is quite a complex writing. The Buddhist leaders in the first 2 periods knew the great law of the Lotus Sutra, but did not expound it because the time had not yet come for its propagation. It wasn't the 5th 500-year period yet. As the Daishonin points out, the latter day is the time for the advent of Bodhisattva superior practices who will spread the essence of the Lotus Sutra, which is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Then the Daishonin refutes the views of Ryokan. We know who he is, right? Yeah. I don't have to describe who that is. Who attempted, he's an evil priest. He's one of the 3 powerful enemies. Then the Daishonin refutes the views of Ryokan, who attempted to restore the Hinayana precepts and who urged the shogunate to put to death his rival Nichiren Daishonin. Basing his view on the Lotus Sutra, the Daishonin regards Ryokan as the 3rd of the 3 powerful enemies and himself as the votary of the sutra. He also describes the other persecutions he experienced. He points out the errors of the shogunate and the Buddhist schools it supported, the Pure Land, True Word, and Zen schools, all shortcut practices, by the way. Okay? The Pure Land's just reading Nimbutsu. True Word is just do a bunch of mudras and madras, okay? And Zen is nothing more than contemplation to perceive, what's not in the sutras. Moreover, he describes how Dingyo's teachings were distorted by his successors, Jikaku and Chisho, and Nichiren talks about that. That's when the true word invaded in Rakuji from Onoji, okay? And they decided that they were going to do Amida Nimbutsu kind of mixture into the Tendai teachings that have become Tendai in Japan, right? So the dudes that were Dingyo's disciples or in Dingyo's lineage that started the problem are Jikaku and Chisho. Always remember that. Okay, they're the ones that thought they were smarter than they were, and they ultimately paid very serious prices for their mistakes, personally. All right? Who incorporated true word teachings into the Tendai school. Okay, so they distorted the Tendai teachings by incorporating true word teachings and saying that they were equivalent. Okay, which the Tendai school is based on the Lotus and the Nirvana, which are the perfect teaching, right? So they're distorting the perfect teaching with the inferior teachings. All right. Moreover, he describes how Dingyo's teachings were. He asserts that the Pure Land and Zen schools have turned the people away from the Lotus Sutra, as they had, because Honen told them all to discard the Lotus Sutra and just chant Amida's name. As a result of these errors, the 3 calamities and 7 disasters have occurred, okay? We're talking about all the bad things that were happening to Japan at that time. And the Daishonin said they were all reflective of the people choosing the wrong teachings. The Daishonin explains that he submitted his work on establishing the correct teaching for the peace of the land, the Risho and Kokoran, to Hojo Tokiyori, the retired regent and de facto leader of the shogunate, to identify the basic cause for these calamities. Not only was his advance unheeded, however, he was subjected to various persecutions. Finally, without carrying out a full investigation, the shogunate exiled him to Sado Island, and Ryokan was behind that exile, using the wives of those officials to get into their heads about get rid of this guy. Because the internal strife he had predicted took place, he was pardoned from exile and summoned to an interview with Heino Seimin. And this is after he came back from Sado, right? And that's the time he sat down with Heino Seimin. He said, you know, blow off all this other stuff or you're screwed, and I'm not going to stick around and try and convince you anymore. This is the 3rd time I've told you this, okay? And so Heino Seimin got all pissed off, and Nichiren left and took off to the mountains immediately and put himself in a place where no one could find him without him wanting them to. That's why he was in the middle of nowhere in Minobu, because he had, after getting back from Sado, instead of going along, they offered him a temple, they offered him money, they offered him anything if he'd just shut up about telling people don't do Nimbutsu, don't do Zen, don't do True Word. And he said, nope, can't do it. It's the latter day of the law. Got no choice, even at the cost of my life. And I'm trying to tell you that's the way it is. And now I'm splitting so you can't easily slit my throat in the middle of the night. Okay? So, he was subjected finally without carrying out a full investigation. Okay. Because the internal strife he had predicted took place, he was pardoned from exile and summoned to an interview with Heino Seimin, a powerful official of the shogun. He was like the sheriff. Heino Seimin asked him when the Mongols would attack Japan, referring to another of the Daishonin's prophecies. The Daishonin replied that it would occur within a year and warned Heino Seimin that mistaken Buddhist teachings should not be relied on for prayers to protect the nation. And still they did True Word, and that's when they almost lost the country. The Mongols did invade. They took to, then the storm came up and they got saved thanks to the Daishonin's prayers, or prayers that were issued. When his admonitions went unheeded, he retired to Mount Minobu. Thus, at this time, the country appeared to be on the verge of ruin. At the end of the letter, the voice returns to that of Inabo Nichii. He says that the sage Nichiren regretted the turn of events had taken. expressing great pity for the people. He says he himself had written down here only as part of the lecture and urges Shimoyama to take faith in the sage's teachings. He expresses his conviction that in the Lotus, that discarding the Nembutsu and embracing the Lotus Sutra, he had the happiness of his parents in mind, and is therefore exercising the highest form of filial piety. Because what is the thing about the Lotus Sutra? When we attain Buddhahood, so do our parents, regardless of what they were actually practicing. They're led to the correct teaching by us, even in death. Okay? All right. You can see how many pages of notes there are here. So I'm going to start reading, and then if I think there are things that I need to go back and clarify, I will next time we read. Right now, I'm going to try and get as far into this as I can. Okay? So, no, I got to get into the definitions real quick. Real quick. There's only 4 of them. All right. Pardon me. Amida. Let's just talk about who is Amida. Do you know who Amida is? Well, I mean, who is he? He's also a son of a great universal wisdom excellence, isn't he? He's a brother of Shakyamuni, according to the sutra, from an ancient time. From an ancient time, not in India, but from an ancient time. Okay? Again, universal wisdom excellence is from an ancient time. Okay? He's not current history of Earth forward, right? Amida, the Buddha of the Pure Land or of perfect bliss in the West. Amida is the Japanese transliteration of the first half of both Amiteyas and Amitabha, names referring to the same Buddha that appear in Sanskrit texts and are rendered in Chinese as the Buddha Infinite Life or the Buddha of Infinite Life. And the Buddha of Infinite Light or the Buddha of Infinite Light, respectively. The Sanskrit word Amida means infinite. Amiteyas is a compound of this word from ayus, which means life, and Amitabha with abaha, which means light. According to the Buddha Infinite Life Sutra, immeasurable kalpas ago, a certain king, delighted with the preachings of a Buddha named World Freedom King, and there's the Sanskrit name there if you're reading this with me on under the letter A for Amida from the dictionary, and began to practice bodhisattva austerities under the guidance of the Buddha. After examining an infinite number of the Buddha lands and pondering for 5 kalpas, the bodhisattva Dharma treasury made 48 vows in which he pledged to create his own Buddha land upon enlightenment, a land that would combine the most outstanding features of all those he examined. In the 8th vow, he pledged to bring all sentient beings who place their hopes of salvation in him. Shantao, a patriarch of the Chinese Pure Land school, interpreted this to mean calling upon the name of Amida Buddha. So that's where the recitation of Amida Buddha's name started from. Okay, so forgetting about Shantao, a patriarch of the Chinese Pure Land school who, you know, what that means is a leader, a patriarch of the Chinese Pure Land Nembutsus, right? Which is where Japan got theirs, from Hon and bringing it back. Interpreted this to mean calling upon the name of Amida Buddha. So that's when they started doing that, to this Buddha land, okay? Which he named perfect bliss. Except those who had committed the 5 cardinal sins and those who had slandered the correct teaching, Dharma Treasury completed his practice and became the Buddha Amida. All right. His Pure Land was established in part of the universe located 100,000 million Buddha lands to the west of this Sahe world Belief in Amida Buddha spread from India to China. After its introduction to Japan, Honen was responsible for popularizing it there and establishing the Pure Land or Jodo sect. See also Nimbutsu Pure Land School. So next is Nimbutsu. So do you understand? This guy's, Amida's not even connected to Earth, okay, in reality, okay? All right, Nimbutsu, to meditate on a Buddha, later interpreted as invoking or reciting a Buddha's name, especially that of the Buddha Amida. Contemplation on Shakyamuni Buddha was an important practice in early Buddhism. Later Mahayana sutras came to describe various Buddhas, and people's desire to see them led to the development of meditation aimed at envisioning these Buddhas. The idea also developed that meditation on a specific Buddha would enable one to be reborn in that Buddha's Buddha land, in that Buddha's land, okay, which would be a Buddha land, right? Eventually, the Buddha Amida came to be the most popular object of such meditation because it's simple. The meditation on the Buddha infant, and it guarantees that's all you have to do, all right? No shakabuku, no mastering anything, you know, listen to the priests. Eventually, the Buddha Amida came to be the most popular object of such meditation. The meditation on the Buddha Infinite Life Sutra states that even an evil person can attain rebirth in Amida's Pure Land, in Amida Buddha's Pure Land, by reciting the Buddha's name on his or her deathbed. So this is like, on your deathbed, you just mention Amida's name a few times and you'll go to Amida's Buddha land. Thus, Nimbutsu primarily concerns Amida Buddha. The practice of the Nimbutsu is believed by its practitioners to lead to rebirth in Amida Buddha's land, or the Pure Land of perfect bliss in the West. It is initially meant, so you're going to go off to heaven somewhere. It is initially meant meditation on Amida. It later came to mean the recitation of Amida's name. Later, it became the recitation of Amida's name in China. From the time of Shantao in the 7th century, the latter usage became prevalent, for he equated meditation on Amida with the recitation of his name. In Japan, Honen followed the example of Shantao and went further to establish the practice of reciting the name of Amida Buddha as the only means for attaining rebirth in the Pure Land of perfect bliss. So that is a take from Honen of Japan. That doesn't really come from Shantao, okay? The Nimbutsu, too, this is a second definition. The Nimbutsu school, another name for the Pure Land school in general. A Pure Land believer is also called a Nimbutsu believer. See also Nimbutsu school and Pure Land school. And they're both, we go to Pure Land school, it says Nimbutsu school. So I'm going to Pure Land school now. Okay, so this is the Jodoman, Jodokyo, Jodoshu. Also Pure Land Ching Chong Tu Jodo teachings, a general term for the Buddhist denominations of the Pure Land teachings in China and Japan. The Pure Land school teaches the attainment of rebirth in the Pure Land of Amida Buddha by means of devotion to Amida Buddha. So you're devoted to Amida Buddha and you go to his heaven, so to speak. Okay? Especially the recitation of Amida's name. The Buddha Infinite Life Sutra, the meditation on the Buddha Infinite Life Sutra, and the Amida Buddha are known as the 3 Pure Land Sutras. So when he's talking about the 3 Pure Land Sutras in this teaching, in this major writing, understand that's what he's talking about. He's talking about infinite life, infinite light, and Amida Sutras. China, the Palian Shi White Lotus Society, a religious group dedicated to Amida worship, was founded in 402 by Hui Yang. This is said to have been the origin of Pure Land practices in China. So that would have been about 500 years exactly before Tentai was born. In the early 6th century, Tan Luan received the meditation on the Buddha Infinite Life Sutra and from Bodhiruchi, and therefore propagated faith in Amida Buddha, asserting that one could be reborn in the Pure Land through Amida's grace. During the 7th century, Lan's teaching was systemized by Tao Chou and his disciple Shantou, who was the patriarch that qualified, we should just say Amida's name over and over and over again. Okay, B, in Japan, the Pure Land teachings including the Nimbutsu, or meditation on Amida Buddha, were at first adopted by the Tendai school when in 848 Jikaku, okay, so one of Dengyo's lineage of leaders at Mount Hei, okay, were first adopted by the Tendai school when in 848 Jikaku, who was later the 3rd chief priest of Enraku-ji, the school's head temple, established. And this was a Lotus Sutra school that the 3rd high priest said, hey, let's pull in some Nimbutsu. All right? The school's head temple established a hall for constant active meditation. Constant active meditation, a form of walking meditation on Mount Hei, and there practiced meditation on Amida Buddha. Ryogen, the 8th chief priest of Enraku-ji, was probably the first to try systemizing the Pure Land doctrines. His disciple Genshin wrote the Essentials of Rebirth in the Pure Land, in which he systematized the teachings of meditation on Amida Buddha within the framework of the Tendai doctrines. Later, Yokan of the 3 treatises Sanran school practiced the recitation of Amida's name. Honen, who was inspired by the works of Shantao of China and the Tendai priest Genshin of Japan, established the Pure Land school. He wrote, and again, this was the guy that Nichiren was all upset with, because Honen is the one that's supplanted the Lotus Sutra's importance at Mount Hei with the Amida Sutra, okay? And that was like bad karma, all right? He wrote the Nimbutsu chosen above all, in which he defined the sole cause of rebirth in the Pure Land to be the practice of calling the name of Amida Buddha, chanting Amida Buddha's name. After his death, the school split into 5 schools: the Shinzei, Seizan, Koraku-ji, Koan-ji, and a group centered around Honen's disciple Kosai. In addition to these schools, Shinran, who was a disciple of Honen, founded the true Pure Land Jodo school. You can see a lot of this, very similar to what happened with Nichiren's teachings. Ipin, who studied under Shio Tatsu, because again, when I mentioned there are 44 schools, there's a reason why there are 44 schools of Nichiren Buddhism. Okay, this same kind of disciple became a separate school. Happened quite often in all schools. Yeah, for 44 total. There are 44 total. Out of all 44, only 4 consider that I shown in the original teacher. Okay? Nichiren Shoshu, 2 derivative priest groups from Nichiren Shoshu, and the Soka Gakkai. Okay? That's what separates us from Nichiren Shu and everybody else, even if they chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. All right? So, Honen's, who studied Shio Tatsu, Honen's 2nd generation disciple founded a school of the Pure Land teachings known as the Time Ji School. God, this got divided up. No wonder it was so confused by the time Nichiren came around, seriously. Besides these schools, there exists the interfusing Nimbutsu, the Yuzu Nimbutsu school, founded on the teachings of Ronin, which also preceded Nichiren, which saw a revival during the Edo period. In Japan, the Pure Land school is also known as the Nimbutsu school. Nimbutsu refers to the invocation of Amida's name. The words Namu Amida Butsu, homage to Amida Butsu, or Amida Buddha, chanted by the school's adherents. 2, the Jodo Shu, the Japanese Buddhist school established by Honen. Its head temple. See, the reason I'm reading this to you is for you to understand how confused this has become by the time Nichiren is saying, don't do that anymore. Yeah. When we talk about a teaching being corrupted, this is a perfect example of that. Okay? So, the Japanese Buddhist school established by Honen, okay, which was established more towards Nichiren's time, 1133 to 1212. Its head temple of Chion, don't forget, Nichiren started in a Tendai Nimbutsu offshoot of Enraku-ji. That's what Seichoji Temple was, where he started out, right? Okay, so Nichiren actually was indoctrinated into Nimbutsu teachings before he was able to go out on his own and discern personally that the lotus was really number one. What were they talking about back at Seichoji when I was a kid? Okay, so the school's principal doctrine is that its followers revere Amida Buddha, believe in his original vow, and invoke Amida Buddha's name in order to be reborn in his pure land. In 1198, Honen wrote the Nimbutsu chosen above all, in which he defined the sole cause for attaining rebirth in Amida Buddha's pure land to be the practice of invoking the Buddha's name. So go to heaven. The easy way is to just say this guy's name, and you're going to go to his Buddha land. All right? To the practice of invoking, okay. Honen revered the patriarchs of the Chinese Pure Land school, Tao Tanluan, Tan Chao, and Shantao, and followed their example by dividing Shakyamuni Buddhist teachings into two categories: the Pure Land teachings, the three Pure Land sutras, which are the Buddha Infinite Life, meditation on the Buddha Infinite Life, and the Amida Sutra, and the Sacred Way teachings, all the other teachings. The Pure Land teachings are defined as the easy-to-practice way, because you just have to say his name, or salvation through Amida's power, and the Sacred Way teachings as the difficult-to-practice way. All the rest of the teachings other than Amida Buddhism, as the difficult-to-practice way. So Amida, Honen taught this in a very prejudicial manner, in which the only thing that made sense was to recite Amida's. It's a complete contradiction of what Nichiren was going to say, bringing back the lotus as the supreme teaching of the perfect teaching. All right? So the Pure Land, the Pure Land teachings are defined as the easy-to-practice way, or salvation through Amida's power, and the Sacred Way teachings as the difficult-to-practice way, or attaining enlightenment through personal power. So instead of a God, the others rely on you bringing forth your own power. The Pure Land school holds that the easy-to-practice way is the one way appropriate for the people of the latter day of the law, who are inferior in their capacity to understand Buddhism. That's why all they have to do is chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. Again, the practice of the Pure Land teachings is regarded as the correct practice, and that of the other teachings as sundry practices, as secondary practices. Honen identified as the principal texts of his school the above three sutras and the treatise on the Pure Land, also known as the treatise on rebirth in the true land, by Vasubandhu. Honen's teaching quickly spread throughout Japan, but was banned in 1207 when the influential Enraku-ji Temple on Mount Hei and Kofuku-ji Temple in Nara protested strongly, and Honen was exiled to Tosa. His disciple Shinran later established the True Word Jodo Shin school. So he was already dead by the time that Daishonin came around, but his teaching was still competing for what is the correct manner to receive Shakyamuni's teachings and practice them even in the latter day. And of course, Nichiren said, no, in the latter day, it's Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. Okay. So the last thing I'm going to say here is what I don't know, because I don't have anything there. I must have decided. Oh, I went to Pure Land School, and all it does is take me back to, or Nimbu. All it does is take me back to what did Pure Land say? See also. There were two things. Jodo. It just says Pure Land. Okay, so now I'm ready to read. Pardon me. Let's get into the. I gave you a little example. I hope you followed it to some degree without me going into the dictionary for all of those people and places and events. Essentially, what we're saying is that the the Nimbutsu, which is not just, Amida, but when we now refer to Nimbutsu, we are generally speaking about Amida Buddhism. Okay, that it had preceded the Daishonin's teaching of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. It had become very popular because it was the easy to practice way. You didn't have to do anything, and you're going to go to heaven. You're going to go to a Buddha land. All right. So now, this is Inabo. What's his last name? Pardon me. What's his name? Well, how did I do that? How did I lose that spot? Last page. Here we go. What's his name again? Inabo. I'm not Nichi-e. I'm just say Inabo from now on. You know who I'm talking about, right? Okay. This is Inabo talking to his either father or his lord. This is from page 684 from volume 2 of the writings of Nichiren Daishonin. Letter to Shimoyama. You have stated that it is imperative, that recitation of the Amida Sutra, and he's saying this to the Lord, right? This is addressed to the Lord. That's who Shimoyama is, not the other way around. Inabo is talking to him. But in actuality, it's the Daishonin that's talking to this Lord, right? Because he's written this cover for Inabo. You have stated that it is imperative that recitation of the Amida Sutra be carried out at the appointed time each day. Even before you gave these instructions in the matter, as an official representative of my father and on my own behalf as well, I have for the past 4 or 5 years, without fail, been carrying out recitation of the Amida Sutra at the appointed time. So he's saying for 4 or 5 years, I've been doing exactly what you've been saying we all need to do. But from the end of spring and beginning of summer last year, I ceased recitation of the Amida Sutra and have devoted all my attention to recitation of the verse section of the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra, which is what? Jiga Tokuburai is what we chant in Gongyo. Okay? That's the verse section of the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra, or have busied myself with a reading of the entire sutra. I do this solely as a form of prayer for the sake of my present and future existences. But as to how I came to cease recitation of the Amida Sutra and the Nimbutsu, I wish to relate the following. These days, the sage Nichiren is known throughout the country of Japan. Some time ago, in the summer of the 11th year of Bunei, 1274, he took up residence in a retreat deep in the mountains near the peak of Mount Minobu in the districts of Iino, Mimaki, and Hakiri. Those are the four mountains, I guess, that are surrounding him or something like that. And Hikiri of our province of Kai. Though qualified persons have asked to be allowed to journey there to receive his doctrinal teaching, they have not been granted permission. Because unless they were his disciples, he wouldn't let them know where he was because he didn't want people coming back after him and trying to kill him again. Okay? It wasn't necessary. He had to focus on getting his teaching done. Right? Okay. They have not been granted permission. So in other words, he's qualified. Inabo is qualifying. A lot of people have wanted to hear what this guy has to say, Nichiren, and never been able to get there. Somehow I was able to have a friend. Again, he's going to explain it. It is felt that unless one has particularly close connections with him, one will not be suited to receive instruction from him. Learning that a certain person was going for an interview with him, I decided to try to go along, not because I intended to take faith in the teachings, but because I simply wished to observe the situation. Slipping into the grounds at a deserted spot, evidently following his friend up, who had been given permission, I needed tissue, please. Slipping into the grounds at a deserted spot, I hid behind the retreat where he is residing and was able to listen in as he explained the doctrine to persons who had questions concerning it. First, he discoursed on the relative worth and profundity of the Lotus Sutra and other sutras such as the Mahevrochana, Flower Garland, Wisdom, Profound Secrets, Lankavatara, and Amida Sutras. He explained that the Lotus Sutra and the Amida Sutra do not differ by mere 1 or 2 degrees of merit, but in fact are as far apart as heaven and earth or clouds and mud. In rank and worth, the Lotus Sutra is to the Amida Sutra as the deity Chakra is to a monkey, as a phoenix is to a magpie, as a great mountain is to a speck of dust, or as the light of the sun and the moon is to that of a firefly. So he's basically saying to his lord or his dad, what you've been trying to teach me doesn't even compare to what Nichiren is talking about as far as what Nichiren's saying. He's saying Lotus Sutra is the top of the top. He cited passages. He's telling about Nichiren talking, right? He, Nichiren, cited passages from the various sutras, comparing them with the Lotus Sutra in such a way that even a fool could understand why the latter is superior, making the point absolutely clear and obvious. So he's saying, I'm sitting there listening to this guy, and what he's saying, it makes 100% sense. And I can understand what he's saying. He's talking about the Lotus Sutra. I don't even know anything about the Lotus Sutra. It's all completely logical. Dad or Lord, I started chanting. Okay, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, making the point absolutely clear and obvious. His teaching on this point seemed to be already well understood by the persons present inside his dwelling, and not to be a matter for surprise, although he was sitting outside sneaking a listen, and he was blown away. He also emphasized that if one wishes to practice the Buddhist teachings, one should go about it by making clear the distinction between Mahayana and Hinayana, provisional and true, as exoteric and esoteric teachings. One should also have a thorough understanding of the time in which we live and take into consideration the factor of the people's capacity. His lecture proceeded as follows. Okay, so now this is Inobo saying, here's what he said specifically. And now we're going to go into actually Nichiren going into a third-party dissertation of his teaching for the sake of Inobo to present in this petition to his Lord, who will eventually chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo and become a follower of Nichiren. His lecture proceeded as follows. In Japan, and this is on page 685, in the middle of the first column, his lecture proceeded as follows. In Japan, at the present time, people all regard the Amida Sutra and the practice of calling on Amida's name as fundamental and look on the Lotus Sutra with contempt. Those who are viewed by the world as persons of wisdom are convinced that they have a thorough grasp of these concepts of time and capacity, and yet they choose a lesser good and cast the greater good aside. They rely on provisional sutras and discard the true sutra. Thus, their lesser good becomes on the contrary, a great evil. Their medicine turns into poison. Where they should act as close kin, they behave like mortal enemies. Such an approach is indeed difficult to remedy. Again, though a person may seem to have a very sound grasp of the Buddhist teachings, if he does not understand how the factors of time, capacity, country, and the proper sequence of propagation relate to the teachings, then although he may labor in mind and body to put the teachings into practice, he will achieve no success. Thus, for example, though one may propagate the Mahayana doctrines in a country where heretofore only the Hinayana doctrines have prevailed, one must not, under any circumstances, propagate the Hinayana doctrines in a country where only the Mahayana doctrines have prevailed. If one insists on propagating them in such a case, the country will be visited by disaster. Why? Why can you preach Mahayana in a Hinayana country, but you can't preach Hinayana in a Mahayana country? Because it's a lesser vehicle, okay? Mahayana means great vehicle, right? So you would not teach a lesser, he's trying to talk about what Honen was saying is incorrect, right? You wouldn't be doing that, okay? We're Mahayanists, okay? All right. If one insists on propagating them, pardon me, let me say that again. From the very bottom of the first column of page 485. Thus, for example, though one may propagate the Mahayana doctrines in a country where heretofore only the Hinayana doctrines have prevailed, one must not, under any circumstance, propagate the Hinayana doctrines in a country where the Mahayana doctrines have prevailed. Or you're confusing people about the truth and you're making an evil cause without meaning to. Okay? If one insists on propagating them in such a case, the country will be visited by disaster and its inhabitants will almost certainly fall into the evil paths of existence. And that's what he's alluding to is happening in Japan at that time that he's writing this, right? Okay, so again, when dealing with a beginner in Buddhist practice, one should never attempt to have such a person practice both the Hinayana and Mahayana doctrines simultaneously. Should never say, do Amida but chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo too. Okay? Simultaneously means at the same time.
Right.
You shouldn't tell them that they should do them at the same time. You should tell them that they should not do them at the same time, that the lotus is a higher teaching, and you definitely don't put the lesser teaching ahead of the higher teaching. After you've mastered the lotus, then you can take a look at the other sutras. In India, it was the custom, because then you understand the perfect teaching, and you can understand the perfect teaching in every one of those other sutras as they are intended, because as the Daishonin has explained, all of these other sutras were the preparation for Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, right? They're not invalid. It's just no longer that age.
Right.
All right? Okay, so again, when dealing with a beginner in Buddhist practice, one should never attempt to have such a person practice both the Hinayana and Mahayana doctrines simultaneously. In India, it was the custom for persons in temples devoted solely to Hinayana teachings to avoid walking in the middle lane of the road, the so-called King's Lane. Similarly, monks in temples devoted solely to Mahayana teachings would avoid walking in the right or the left lanes. In like manner, the two groups would refrain from drinking water from the same well. In other words, they wouldn't take the same path on the road. One would avoid the center, the others would avoid the sides. Okay? They wouldn't drink water from the same well or the same river. They were that, because again, you know, when we talk about what he's saying, he's talking about the Theravadins. Okay, the Theravadins is the Agama Sutras, okay? The 500 rules for women and 250 for men. You know, that old men are superior, old doctrine. All right? So again, and of course they would never live together in the same room. So he's saying they just wouldn't mix. They're two different belief sets. And the Theravadins were very strict about rejecting anything that the Mahayanas had to say because they came after. Their sutras were revealed after the Hinayana sutras. Right? This is all preparatory. This is all in an order of succession that allows for the correct teaching 1,000 years or more later, 2,000 years or more later, to be understood correctly. Okay? It's to make clear what to disassociate oneself from as a primary circumstance and consider sundry versus what they said at the time because they didn't know any better. Nichiren hadn't made his advent. Nam-myoho Renge-kyo did not exist in any of those previous times. It wasn't an alternative. All right? All right. In like manner, the two groups would refrain from drinking water from the same well or the same river. Of course, they would never live together in the same room. The Lotus Sutra, speaking of beginners in temples devoted solely to Mahayana teachings, describes them as desiring only to accept and embrace the sutra of the great vehicle, Mahayana, and not accepting a single verse of the other sutras. Okay, so they make this vow when they decide they take the Mahayana precepts. It also says, again, one should not associate with monks, nuns, laymen, or laywomen who seek to become voice hearers, nor should one question or visit them. Why? Why should you not, Mahayana should not associate with monks, nuns, laymen, or laywomen who seek to become voice hearers? They're not seeking to become Buddhas. They're seeking to become lesser entities, thinking that that's why people, that voice hearers and cause awakened ones could never attain Buddhahood, because they'd never accept the reality that they possess the Buddha nature, right? Okay, so again, one should not associate with monks, nuns, laymen, or laywomen who say, hey, my goal is to become, like Shri Putra. No, not now, okay? Nor should one question or visit them, because their information is not going to be based on the correct understanding. You guys with me?
Yeah.
All right. Thus, though one's own father or mother may have been a monk or nun living in a temple devoted solely to Hinayana teachings, if one lived in a temple devoted solely to Mahayana, one would not pay obeisance to one's father or mother or attempt to associate closely with either of them. And of course, one would never have gone so far as to practice the Hinayana teachings that they followed. Temples in which both Mahayana and Hinayana's temples in which both Mahayana and Hinayana practices were observed were suitable only for bodhisattvas, okay, which had already gotten past voice hearer and cause awakened ones, to not get confused about going backwards, okay, who were far advanced in religious training, They understood replacing the three vehicles with the one vehicle, okay, because the Lotus Sutra does exist. That understanding didn't originate with Nichiren and Tentai. It's in the sutra. It may not have been expressed as replacing the three vehicles with the one vehicle as Tentai named it, but the teaching was there. Okay. Thank you. Thus, though one's own father or mother may have been a monk or nun living in a temple devoted solely to Hinayana teachings, if one lived in a temple devoted solely to Mahayana, one would not pay obeisance to one's father or mother or attempt to associate closely with either of them. And of course, one would never have gone as far as to practice the Hinayana teachings. Temples in which both Mahayana and Hinayana practices were observed and were suitable only for bodhisattvas who were far advanced in religious training. The Buddhism that was first introduced on page 686 to this country of Japan was a mixture of Mahayana and Hinayana practices. Okay? What got transferred from Korea was a mixture of Mahayana and Hinayana practices. In the reign of the 45th human sovereign, Emperor Shomu, a man known as Reverend Chin, called Ganjin in Japan, of Lungxing Tzu Temple in Yangzhou in China, came to the Japanese court, bringing with him the Lotus Sutra and the teachings of the Tentai school. But perhaps because he felt that the capacities of the people of that time were not ready to receive the perfect teaching, he kept these teachings locked away in his heart and did not allow his mouth to speak of them. Instead, the Hinayana precepts disseminated by the by the discipline master Tao Xuan of Fente Su Temple of Mount Chongnan in China were introduced, and ordination platforms for administering such precepts were established at 3 places in Japan. Okay, but this was done simply as an expedient means to prepare for the propagation of the doctrines of the Lotus School. Once the Mahayana teachings were established, Dengyo, it was not intended that the Hinayana precepts should be carried on simultaneously with them. Okay, so Dengyo knew about Amida, he knew about all that stuff, but he already qualified Lotus as a superior teaching, and he never chanted Amida. Okay, it's Jikaku and Chisho that mixed in the true word. Okay, and the Nembutsu got driven out, and the true word came in at Mount Hei. Okay, Hinayana precepts should be carried on once the Mahayana teachings were established, it was not intended that these Hinayana precepts should be carried on simultaneously with them. It is like the case of China, where the 3 sages, among them Confucius, founder of the Confucian school, and Lao Tzu, were sent as messengers of the Buddha to China to teach people the writings pertaining to rites and music so that they might serve as a preparation for the sacred texts of Buddhism. Thus, in Great Concentration and Insight, a sutra is quoted that says, I, the Buddha, have dispatched the 3 sages to educate the land of China. The great teacher Myolo says, first the teachings on rites and music were set forth, and later the true way was introduced. The Buddha set forth the Hinayana precepts so that they could act for a time as a kind of first step toward the Mahayana teachings. Okay, very bottom of page 686, the last line. But when at the top of the second column, when the time appropriate for them had passed, he forbade them to be used any longer. Thus, in the Nirvana Sutra, he says, suppose there were a person who said that the thus come one is transient in nature. Could such a person escape having his tongue fall out? Later in the, you understand? What does transient in nature mean? It only exists for a little while. It only exists transient. It comes and goes.
Comes and goes.
Okay? Thus, the Nirvana Sutra says, suppose there were a person who said that Shakyamuni was a transient dude. Okay? So his teachings were transient in nature. Could such a person escape having their tongue fall out for making such a cause of slander, is what he's saying. With that same attitude and voice and passion. You know, it's like, are you nuts? Seriously. That's why he's saying, could they escape having their tongue fall out? He's saying this is all very logical. Think about it. You're committing slander. All right? You're not propagating the true teaching. You're destroying it. By saying there are equivalencies or easier ways or easier understandings to rely on instead. No. Okay? That's why Nichiren comes along with Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. And all the teachings are all contained in the single phrase. There's no dispute about what teaching is superior. They're all contained within Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Okay? Suppose there were a person who said that the thus come, later, in the reign of the top first full paragraph on second column of 686. Later, in the reign of the 15th human sovereign, Emperor Kamu, a sage known as the great teacher Dengyo appeared. He first made a thorough study of the 6 schools of Buddhism in Japan. The flower garland, the 3 treatises, the Dharma characteristics, the Dharma analysis treasury, the establishment of the truth, and the precept schools. Moreover, he investigated the arcane doctrines of the Bodhidharma school. Do you know what the Bodhidharma school is? Who's Bodhidharma? Made up Zen. Created Zen. He out of his own mind. Okay? That's it. That is Bodhidharma school was Zen. All right? And also made inquiry, which is not based on any of Shakyamuni's sutras. Okay? He says it's an understanding that's derived outside of the sutras. So it's based on Bodhidharma's teachings. Bodhidharma made his own sutras. Okay? And also made inquiry into the teachings of the Tentai and the True Word schools, which at the time had not yet been propagated in Japan. Now we're talking about Dengyo now, right? Yeah. So Dengyo checked everything out himself. The purpose of these exhaustive studies was to determine the relative profundity and worth of the various doctrines. So he wasn't like I'm all sold on Lotus. Do you understand? He was checking it all out. All right. He even went to China to try to figure it out. Or no, he relied on the seven temples in Japan. Sorry. In the 21st year, middle of the second column month, 686. In the 21st year of the Inraku era, 802, on the 19th day of the first month, Emperor Kamu visited the temple at Mount Takeo, where he summoned Zengi, Gonso, and others, 14 men who were leaders of the 7 major temples of Nara, the southern capital of Japan, right? This is how the Mahayana ordination platform got established. The Emperor Kamu went to go visit all these other guys, and he said, I want you to debate Dengyo. Okay? Just like Tentai had been challenged to debate by the 7 schools of the north and the 3 schools of the south, but he didn't go because he knew it was a setup to be killed. Okay? Now, this has been ordered by Kamu, the emperor, and it's to determine what is the supreme teaching. Okay? So he goes to the guys of the other schools and says, you've got to meet Dengyo and beat him, okay, because he's bringing up this Lotus stuff and going against our traditional understandings. Do you understand? All right. So the bottom line is Dengyo kicked everybody's ass. And Emperor Kamu made, okay, you do your ordination platform. And the significance of Dengyo is he was the first person that actually created an ordination platform for the Mahayana precepts. Okay? So, okay, in the 21st year of the Inraku era, 802, on the 19th day of the first month, Emperor Kamu visited the temple at Mount Takeo, where he summoned Zengi, Gonso, and others, 14 men who were leaders of the 7 major temples of Nara, the southern capital, and had them meet with the great teacher Dengyo to investigate and make clear the relative worth of the teachings of the 6 schools as they compared with those of the Lotus school, as they compared with Dengyo's Lotus school. Each of these eminent scholars asserted that the doctrines of his particular school represented the highest point in the Buddha's lifetime of teachings, but the great teacher Dengyo, with a single word, demolished all their arguments. The emperor once more issued an order commanding Wake no Hiroyo to act as his envoy and to reprimand the 14 men who could not back up their shit. Okay, in other words, when they got defeated in debate because they couldn't say anything to offset Dengyo, who very easily dispatched them with simple facts, which is also what Nichiren did. Okay, they got reprimanded. They, in turn, the most outstanding scholars of the 7 major temples and the 6 schools, unanimously expressed their apologies in a memorial to the throne. Their apologies for not knowing better, that Dengyo had straightened them out in that debate, thanks to Kamu saying, you got to do it. In their memorial, the 14 men stated, from now on, all the beings in this world who are endowed with life will be able to embark on the ship of the wonderful and perfect truth and quickly reach the opposite shore. They'll be able to attain Buddhahood because it's now Dingyo has now said, the lotus is kicking your ass. Okay? All right. So then the great teacher Dingyo stated that he had forthwith cast aside the 250 precepts, do's and don'ts of the Hinayana, right? Okay, because precepts don't occur in Mahayana. All right. He had cast aside the Hinayana do's and don'ts. Is what that just says. He makes a declaration. Okay. He also said that the former and the middle days are almost over and the latter day is near at hand. So he knew what was coming. Okay. And he said, in the school of the single vehicle, none of the provisional teaching should be regarded as valid. None of the provisional teaching should be regarded as valid. This is the originator of that school in Rakuji that had defeated everybody else that Jikaku and Chisho then let in true word later on, after the fact, after this time period had all passed. All right? He said, do not place impure food in a jeweled vessel. So there's very strict admonition, do not mix anything with the lotus teachings that I'm teaching you guys, right? He said the great Arhat who lived during the Buddha's lifetime has already been scolded and told what to do. How then should the little mosquitoes and gadflies who live in the age after the Buddha's passing presume to do otherwise? I am not here propounding some private opinion of my own. Okay? This is the Daishonin being quoted as this being part of his presentation that was Inobo heard outside the tent, if you will. You understand? Outside the dwelling. Now, this is Nichiren being quoted as having said as part of his presentation, I am not here propounding some private opinion of my own. In the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha said, honestly discarding expedient means, I will preach only the unsurpassed way. And the Nirvana Sutra speaks of people of mistaken views. Now, what's the Lotus and Nirvana that he's just quoted? That is the perfect teaching, right? These terms, mistaken views and expedient means, refer to the flower garland, Mahavrochana, which is true word, wisdom, Amida, and the other various schools expounded in the first 40 or more years of the Buddha's preaching life. The great teacher Tentai says that the word discarding in the Lotus Sutra's passage quoted above means casting aside. It means you don't kind of leave it hanging there and kind of look at it with fondness or sentimentality of the old way you used to. No, you cast it aside. You get rid of it. He also says that to slander means to turn against. Okay? So his entire school ultimately slandered the Lotus Sutra. In the way honest beginners should practice the Lotus Sutra is to discard the above-mentioned sutras and schools, not the Lotus or the Perfect or the Nirvana, but those other schools that he's already lost to him in debate. Okay, the way honest beginners should practice the Lotus Sutra is to discard the above-mentioned sutras and schools of Buddhism and to devote themselves to the practice of the Lotus Sutra alone. Alone. Such persons are the true practitioners of the sutras, plural, because the Lotus will open up all the other sutras to be understood correctly. Do you understand? Who are honest. Such persons who are true practitioners of the sutra, who are honest. But if the beginners practice the various other sutras simultaneous with the Lotus Sutra, trying to cover all the bases at once, as bodhisattvas who are far advanced in religious practice do, then they are being dishonest. They're not ready. They're not capable. Even in the secular life, it is customary that a worthy man does not serve two lords, and a virtuous woman does not try to take to herself two husbands. Personal objection is useless. Personal objection is useless. This is the way it is, okay? The Thus Come One himself looked into the future and clearly stated who would propagate his teachings and what sutras would be propagated during the 1,000 years of the former day and the middle day of the law following his passing. The 1,000 years of the middle day of the law and the 10,000 years of the latter day of the law. I misread that. Going again, top of first full paragraph of 687. The Thus Come One himself looked into the future and clearly stated who would propagate his teachings and what sutras would be propagated during the 1,000 years of the former day of the law following his passing, the 1,000 years of the middle day of the law, and the 10,000 years of the latter day of the law. If anyone should appear in the world who goes against these dictates of Shakyamuni saying in his sutra, whether a sage or a worthy ruler, it won't matter. His words should not be heeded. The Buddha, and I'll wrap this up, the Buddha stated that in the first 500 years of the former day of the law, which would begin the day after his passing, only Hinayana Sutras should be propagated in the former day of the law. This would be done by Mahekashayapa, Ananda, and the other disciples down to Yashas, yes, 11 men in all. In the second 500-year period of the former day of the law, provisional Mahayana sutras such as the flower garland, correct and equal, profound secrets, wisdom, Mahavrachana, meditation, and Amida sutras were to be propagated. So he's qualified all of that is actually still former day of the law. Okay? Second 500-year period. This would be done by the 4 ranks of bodhisattvas who were the great scholars such as Maitreya, Manjushri, Ashvagosha, and Nagarjuna, Asanga, and Vasubandhu. These great scholars not only understood the profound meaning of the Lotus Sutra, but they knew that the time for the propagation of the Lotus Sutra had not yet come. And since they had not been commanded by the Buddha to propound these great doctrines, though they preserved them in their minds, they did not allow their mouths to speak of them. At times, perhaps, they spoke certain words that hinted at them, but the true meaning of these doctrines remained hidden and unrevealed. With the beginning of the 1,000 years of the middle day of the law, Buddhism gradually spread from India to China and Japan. The Buddha, the world-honored one, had expressly entrusted the first part of the Lotus Sutra, the 14 chapters that make up the theoretical teaching, to the bodhisattvas of the theoretical teaching, such as Bodhisattva Medicine King and the bodhisattvas of the worlds other than our present one. Are you hip? All those guys that were mentioned in the Lotus Sutra, but that they don't leave at the end of supernatural powers, they leave in entrustment. Okay, right? That's the whole point. They're not bodhisattvas of the earth, quite frankly. They're teachers of the middle day of the middle day. The middle part of the middle day. Okay, so let me say that again. The Buddha, the world-honored one, had expressly entrusted the first part of Lotus Sutra, the 14 chapters that make up the theoretical teaching, to the bodhisattvas of the theoretical teaching, such as the Bodhisattva Medicine King, and to the bodhisattvas of worlds other than our present one, as we read in the Lotus Sutra, in the Lotus Sutra itself. This was done as a kind of prelude to the appearance of the great bodhisattvas who emerged from the earth in the beginning of the latter day of the law to teach all the living beings of this continent of Jampadvipa to chant the 5 characters of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, which are the heart of the lifespan chapter of the essential teaching. Are you with me there? He just made a quick shift to say, this was done as a kind of prelude to the appearance of my disciples who emerge at the beginning of the latter day to teach all of the living beings on this continent of Jampadvipa to chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, which is the heart of the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra, of the essential teaching. You with me?
Yeah.
Okay, so those who were designated to propagate the essential teaching or the theoretical teaching were persons such as Nanye, Tentai, Myolo, and Dingyo, the theoretical understanding, okay? Because they didn't have Nam-myoho Renge-kyo yet.
Right.
They could do 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, but it was theoretical.
Not yet.
Okay. Now the world has entered the age when the Bodhisattva superior practices and the others of his group are destined to make their appearance. Even I, with my untutored eyes, can see the signs that this is about to occur. If we examine the matter, we see that the sutras that the other schools rely on, such as the Flower Garland, Mahavrachana, which is true word, and the Amida Sutras, were intended to be propagated in the latter 500 years of the 1,000-year former day of the law, or in the period of doctrinal controversy in the beginning of the middle day of the law. Yet the Buddhist teachers, not only mistaking the relative profundity and worth of the various sutras, but also forgetting the Buddha's instructions regarding them, ignore the factors of time and capacity and unreasonably establish schools that recommend these sutras as proper practice for the middle and latter days of the law. This is like planting seeds in an autumn field and hoping to reap grain in the dead of winter. Like expecting to see a full moon when the moon is in its last quarter, or to see the sun shining at midnight. Even more is true of the precept school, which is purely Hinayana in nature. It represents a minor doctrine practiced in India in the first 500 years of the 1,000-year former day of the law. It was introduced to Japan around the middle day of the law, before the propagation of Lotus Sutra teachings of the Tendai school, and was used for the first time to develop the capacities of the people of the age. It is like the morning star that shines after sunrise, or clouds that appear before a rainstorm. Of what use are the star or the clouds once the sun has arisen or the rain has fallen? Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to read one more paragraph.
Okay.
I'm going to try and, in fact, I'm going to read one more paragraph. Now the time for such teachings has ended. Now the time for such teachings has ended. Now that we have entered the latter day of the law, to follow such practices is like applying a mild medicine to a severe ailment, or like loading a huge stone on a little boat. Persons who pursue such practices will exhaust themselves, spending much time and producing no results, bringing forth flowers but no fruit. And then I'll continue on page 688 when we get together again in a month. And if I think there was anything in there, once I'm kind of reviewing, I think they have to pull something out of the dictionary, I will, whatever. Thank you so much.
Thank you.